Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into one of the most powerful, absolutely brilliantly structured arguments in ancient literature. We're looking at a huge pivotal moment from the Mahabharata, specifically Draupadi's epic, impassioned speech to her husband, King Yudhishthira. We're going to break down her masterful use of rhetoric, duty, and just raw emotion to challenge the entire concept of passivity. If you love seeing how a genius communicator completely dismantles an opposing argument piece by piece, well, you're going to be absolutely fascinated by what we have lined up for you today. Ponder this profound ethical dilemma for a second. Is there ever a time when forgiveness becomes a flaw? We're so often taught that patience, forgiveness, and stoicism are the ultimate virtues, right? But is there a breaking point? Is there a moment when holding on to your peace actually becomes a moral failure? This is exactly the tension at the heart of our source text today. We're stepping into a moment of profound despair for our heroes to see how one brilliant woman uses this exact question to try and snap a king out of his moral slumber. Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1. Exiled to the Woods. To really grasp the sheer force of Draupadi's argument, we have to understand the raw, stinging injustice of their situation. The Pandavas, the rightful royals, have been banished into the unforgiving woods, stripped of their entire kingdom, and literally forced to wear rough deerskins. Draupadi kicks things off by reminding Yudhishthira of the sheer cruelty of their enemies. Because look, while the rest of the Kuru court wept openly when the Pandavas were banished, 4 specific men, Duryodhana, Karna, the evil-minded Sakuni, and the fierce Dussasana, didn't shed a single tear. In fact, they rejoiced. Draupadi uses this to establish a baseline of undeniable malice. She's basically telling her husband, hey, these aren't people who just made a little mistake. These are wicked-minded wretches with hearts made of steel, and they feel absolutely zero regret for your suffering. Moving on to part 2. Royal past versus the bitter present. Having locked in the pure villainy of their enemies, Draupadi knows she has to break through Yudhishthira's stoic, passive acceptance of their fate. So she decides to weaponize his own memory against him. Just listen to how she structures this contrast. She reminds him of a past where he sat surrounded by kings on a gorgeous ivory seat decked out with jewels, his body radiant, dressed in pure white silk, feeding thousands from plates of solid gold. And then she contrasts that with his bitter present reality, sitting on rough kusa grass, his body literally besmeared with mud and dirt, wearing rags. Draupadi is intentionally agitating him here. She's demanding to know, how can your heart possibly know peace when you look at this contrast? How can you accept this filthy, destitute reality when you were born to provide such immense generosity and live in absolute splendor? And that brings us to the core engine of her speech. Just imagine the raw cadence of her voice as she demands, "Why doth not thy anger blaze up?" You see, this isn't just a question, it's a forceful, urgent demand for action. Draupadi uses this exact phrasing as a recurring refrain throughout her entire argument. She is systematically rejecting passive suffering. She's essentially telling him, feeling sad? Not enough. The only appropriate, righteous response to what has happened to us is a blazing, consuming anger. Which brings us to part 3, the suffering of heroes. Draupadi realizes that, okay, if Yudhishthira won't get angry for his own sake, maybe he'll get angry for the sake of the people he loves. So she moves systematically, brother by brother, turning the knife of guilt and honor. She starts with the mighty Bhimasena. Here is a man formally dressed in costly apparel, totally capable of slaying all the Kurus single-handedly. Yet today, he's living in deep sorrow in the woods, eating only what the forest yields. And why? Draupadi makes absolutely sure Yudhishthira knows it's entirely his fault. Bhima's immense strength is suppressed solely because he strictly waits for the fulfillment of Yudhishthira's promise. He is suffering purely out of loyalty to his brother's word. Here is that driving, rhythmic refrain again, perfectly deployed. Why doth not thy anger, O king, blaze up upon beholding the illustrious Bhimasena so fallen into distress? She forces Yudhishthira to look at his fiercely loyal brother and asks this piercing question. She emphasizes that Bhima is a man who accomplishes everything unaided, totally deserving of happiness, yet he's fallen into this terrible distress. The frustration in her voice is just palpable. She's asking, look, if you won't fight for yourself, how on earth can you watch your most loyal defender suffer this completely undeserved pain and still remain calm? Next, she pivots to the unparalleled warrior Arjuna. She reminds the king of Arjuna's almost godlike combat prowess. I mean, this is a man who can shoot 500 arrows in a single go. He's equal to a 1,000-armed warrior. He's a chastiser of foes who is literally like Yama himself, the god of death at the end of the world. He conquered kings to bring wealth for Yudhishthira's sacrifices, and he's vanquished celestials, men, and serpents all from a single chariot. But now, he's anxious in exile. This tiger among men who was once honored with cars, horses, and elephants is now stripped of his vehicles, just wandering the woods. And this brilliantly illustrates Draupadi's tactical genius. She hammers home her point by showcasing Arjuna's completely wasted potential. She asks, "Why, O king, doth not thy wrath blaze up at sight of that Arjuna in exile?" She is absolutely bewildered that the king can look at the greatest weapon on earth, a warrior who forced all the kings of the globe to wait upon them, reduced to an anxious wanderer, and not feel completely indignant. Her repetition of the refrain builds this relentless, heavy pressure right onto Yudhishthira's conscience. Then she turns her attention to the youngest brothers, the twins Nakula and Sahadeva. She highlights their virtues. They're fair, young, able-bodied, and Nakula is noted as the foremost of all swordsmen. They literally represent the bright, shining future of their lineage. Yet in reality, these handsome and brave young men are utterly overwhelmed with grief right now in their exile. Maintaining that incredible narrative momentum, Draupadi delivers the refrain once more. "Why doth not thy anger blaze up, O king, at sight of both Nakula and Sahadeva overwhelmed with grief?" She's questioning how Yudhishthira can possibly pardon the enemy when looking at Madri's sons. These two are so undeserving of this distress. She is directly attacking his protective instincts as an older brother. It's like she's saying, if the suffering of the strong, like Bhima and Arjuna, doesn't move you, how can you watch the grief of the youngest and most innocent among us and still refuse to act? Finally, Draupadi shifts the focus to herself, and this is a total masterstroke. She reminds Yudhishthira exactly who she is. Born of the race of Drupada, the sister of Drishtadyumna, the daughter-in-law of the illustrious Pandu, and the devoted wife of heroes. Her pedigree is completely unmatched. Yet despite this incredible high birth, she is suffering right alongside them in exile. She forces him to confront the profound insult of her current state, because by failing to protect her status, he's failing his own honor and the honor of his entire lineage. Now, what's really interesting about her argument here is her final, incredibly cutting assessment of his character. She says, "Truly, O thou best of the Bharatas, thou hast no anger, else why is it that thy mind is not moved at sight of thy brothers and myself?" She points out a famous proverb. It's said there is no Kshatriya in the world bereft of anger. But in him, she beholds a living refutation of that exact proverb. Her incredulity is just staggering. She's outright telling him that his lack of anger is fundamentally unnatural for a warrior and a king. So, the crucial point is, Part 4, the philosophy of righteous anger. See, what happens next is fascinating. Draupadi doesn't just stop at personal grievances. She uses all of these painful personal examples to pivot to a grand, universal, philosophical call to arms. She moves from complaining about their living conditions to literally lecturing the king on the very nature of his existential duty. To really get her conclusion, we have to look closely at this definition. A Kshatriya is a member of the warrior and ruling class. Within this ancient framework, their primary cosmic duty, their dharma, is not pacifism. No, their duty requires showing energy, strength, and yes, wrath, when they are wronged or when justice needs to be restored. Draupadi is reminding Yudhishthira that by forgiving his enemies right now, he isn't being a saint. He's actually violating his secret duty as a Kshatriya. Draupadi's ultimate, devastating conclusion lays out a really stark binary for the king. She argues that a Kshatriya who hides his energy when wronged is forever disregarded by all creatures. On the flip side, she warns that a Kshatriya who won't appease his wrath when the time for forgiveness has passed, someone who just refuses to act, meets destruction both in this world and the next. Passivity in the face of gross injustice isn't noble, it's self-destructive. She is demanding that he unleash his energy because with his power, he could slay all their foes. And that brings us to our final thought, leaving us with a truly timeless question. Draupadi's argument reaches across millennia to challenge us today. Where exactly do we draw the line between noble patience and necessary wrath? Is there a point where forgiveness is simply a mask for cowardice? Well, Draupadi certainly thought so, and her brilliant, systematic dismantling of Yudhishthira's passivity is an absolute masterclass in persuasion. I really hope this explainer gave you a new appreciation for the depth and power of this source material. Keep this question in mind as you navigate the world, and we will catch you in the next explainer.